Now that you are familiar with the 4 characteristics of chordates, and if you don't remember them, you can go back to the chordate intro, but we want to move on now and think about the development of vertebrates over time and how the change in vertebrate evolution has been so significant to the diversity of this kingdom. So the first step to vertebrate evolution is actually the development of jaws. This may not seem like anything all that exciting to you, but you've got to keep in mind that most organisms up to this point just simply ingested their food through absorption or surrounded it. And I mean, we did see some amount of feeding in arthropods and so on, but when we look at true structures associated with being able to ingest a variety of foods, jaws becomes really important. So the first organism that we see with jaws is actually something known as a lamprey, and this isn't even jaws like you think. So not the chewing kind of jaws that you have, but instead has this disc with teeth that's actually going to kind of hang on to organisms and sort of act as a piercing type of structure, but certainly not a chewing jaw as you think. We actually really worry about lampreys in the Great Lakes. Here's the interesting little beast, right, with these rings of teeth. So jaws from the standpoint that they have teeth attached to structural features that would act like a jaw in order to get food into the mouth. They attach onto fish, particularly we see them in the Great Lakes now. They originally started out actually in the ocean systems and got into the Great Lakes through ballast water in ships. And this introduction of them has decimated the lake trout population in the Great Lakes. So you see in the 1930s, early 1900s, mid-1900s, the populations of lake trout were doing fairly well, but over time we see a huge drop-off in those populations about the time we see spikes in the sea lamprey populations. Now, the sea lamprey populations have crashed because, why? The lake trout populations go down. If they're eating lake trout and they have no food supply, then the predator ends up dying as well, right? So the sea lamprey then falls off. We have seen recovery in the lake trout populations in recent years, more because of stocking and conservation efforts, but the sea lamprey certainly are still present in our Great Lakes systems. So the other one that lacks a hinged jaw but still has jaw-like features is something known as the hagfish. So these both actually fit into what we call a craniate category with a notochord. Now you know what a notochord is, okay? They lack this hinged jaw, but they have fins that are going to allow them to act like fish and be able to move around pretty well. Hagfish don't have any kind of vertebral structures. Lampreys have a basic vertebral structure. So between the two, and you'll see they don't look a whole lot different in a second, but you see that the lampreys actually get classified into a vertebrate category because of these structures. The hagfish actually fall into a not vertebrate structure or not vertebrate category, but are still chordates. These are all still chordates we're talking about. Okay, so the development of actual vertebral structures becomes very important, and we mentioned this briefly before, that all vertebrates are chordates, but not all chordates are vertebrates. This is the hagfish. You may have seen them before on fishing shows or something. They produce this huge amount of slime as a defense mechanism. If you bite this thing and get a mouthful of that slime, it's not very appetizing, right? So in these structures, we look for the development of different types of defense mechanisms. Now that we're going to be dealing in a world that has jaws, many of these softer bodied organisms are going to have to find a way to survive. This is a terrific defense mechanism for that. So the introduction of actual jaws as you think of them didn't appear until we start thinking more about basic fish type organisms, not so much those eel looking things, but more fish type. And we see jawed vertebrates about 470 million years ago. So interesting in the fact that they diversified very, very quickly and actually went through a variety of different types of fishes. And I'll show you the 3 classifications in just a second. But we've got to keep in mind that just because they have jaws now, they still have to take in oxygen, right? They are still going to have to find a way to go through the gas exchange process. And what we look for are these gill slits. So the pharyngeal gill slits that we talk about in chordates actually act as gills in our fish, right? So whether you're a shark or ray, in our shark categories, whether we look at our ray-finned fish, our lobed-finned fish, fit into different categories. So we'll actually start with the sharks and rays and then eventually move into ray-finned fish, or what we call our bony-finned fish, and then into lobed-finned fish. So with our sharks and rays, you may know already that the skeleton is actually made of cartilage. There's no bone here, okay? So what we have to look for is, in order to move further through our development of chordates and vertebrates, we have to think about how this transition may occur from a very soft kind of bodied structure to a more solid bodied structure. You may know sharks have to swim constantly. Keep on swimming, right? Because if they don't, they can't pass water over their gills to actually breathe. So with our sharks, you notice in many of the movies and that they kind of continuously keep moving to keep that oxygenated water flowing over their gills. Same with our rays. They're very busy moving around, and if they're not moving around, they're sitting in an area where they would actually have water kind of being forced into their buccal cavity, so their mouth, and then going across their gills. You see the gills here on the underside of our ray. So that movement of water would be important if they're not moving themselves.